A town is never truly creepy because it is empty. The real fear begins when it still looks like life should be happening there. A school without students, a motel without travelers, a church without voices, a street built for traffic, now listening to nothing. Across drowned valleys, poisoned neighborhoods, burning coal seams, desert highways, frozen mining camps, and disaster zones locked in time, these abandoned towns reveal how quickly a place can lose its future. One industry dies, one road moves, one mistake spreads, then people vanish, and the town stays behind, waiting like it never got the message. 18. Eckley Miners Village, Pennsylvania. Eckley does not scare you with collapse. It scares you because it still looks organized, almost too organized, like a coal company's dream of control was preserved in place. Hidden in Pennsylvania's anthracite region, Eckley began in the 1850s as a patch town built for miners and their families. It was not designed like a free town where people built whatever life they wanted. It was shaped around one purpose: extracting coal. The houses lined up according to class and position. Workers lived in small company homes. Supervisors had better houses. The company store, church, school, and doctor's office created a whole world where almost everything connected back to the mine. At its peak, hundreds of people lived here, and daily life followed the rhythm of the coal industry. Men went underground, children walked past black dust and wooden porches. Families bought goods on company terms and lived under the shadow of both the mountain and the operator. Eckley is not abandoned in the wild, collapsing sense. It survives as a preserved mining village, which makes it even stranger. The houses are still there. The streets remain. The silence feels arranged. It is less like a ghost town and more like a frozen diagram of how coal companies once controlled entire lives from paycheck to front porch. 17. Henry River Mill Village, North Carolina. Henry River Mill Village feels abandoned in a way that is almost cinematic, which is why Hollywood noticed it. But before cameras came, this was a real working village where textile labor shaped everyday life. Located in Burke County, North Carolina, the village began in the early 1900s around a cotton mill powered by the Henry River. A company store, worker houses, and mill buildings created a tight community where people lived close to the source of their wages. The mill was the anchor. The houses were not random homes, they were part of an industrial system where work, housing, shopping, and community all sat under the same economic shadow. For decades, the village survived on textile production. But as manufacturing changed, mills across the South began to close, relocate, or lose their role in small town life. Henry River's mill eventually shut down, and a fire later damaged the industrial heart of the village. Residents left, houses aged, and the place drifted into decay. The abandoned homes became famous after the village was used as District 12 in the Hunger Games, but the real story is older and sadder than a film set. These porches once held workers, families, children, and tired evenings after long shifts. Its creepiness comes from the way fiction and history overlap. The village looks staged, but the abandonment was real long before the movie made it famous. 16. Blue Heron, Kentucky. Blue Heron looks like a ghost town drawn in outline. In Kentucky's Big South Fork region, Blue Heron, also called Mine 18, was a coal camp operated by the Stearns Coal and Lumber Company beginning in the 1930s. It was built for extraction, but it was also home. Workers lived there with families. Children went to school. Coal moved from the mountain to the tipple, then out by rail. The community had houses, a store, a bathhouse, a church, and all the routines of a company town where life followed the mine whistle. The mine operated for decades, but coal camps were fragile by design. When the operation closed in the early 1960s, Blue Heron lost the force holding it together. Families left because the work was gone. Buildings disappeared over time. The town emptied into memory. What makes Blue Heron unusual today is how it has been preserved. Instead of pretending the original town survived intact, the site uses open-air, ghost structures, metal frames outlining buildings that used to stand there. The result is strangely powerful. You see the shape of a town without the town itself. Blue Heron feels like walking through an X-ray of Appalachian coal life. The walls are gone, but the outline remains, and somehow that absence says more than a restored building ever could. 15. Elkmont, Tennessee. Elkmont does not feel like a town that collapsed. It feels like summer ended and no one came back. Deep inside Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Elkmont began with logging. The Little River Lumber Company pushed into the mountains in the early 1900s, cutting timber and using rail lines to move wood out of the valley. But after the logging era, the same access that served industry helped create something very different, a mountain resort community. Wealthier families from Knoxville and surrounding areas built summer cabins. Social clubs formed. The Wonderland Hotel welcomed guests. Porches filled with conversation, dances, fishing trips, and cool mountain air. Elkmont became a seasonal escape, not a coal camp or mill village, which makes its abandonment feel unusually quiet. When the national park was created, private land was gradually acquired. Some families received leases that allowed them to keep using cabins for decades, but the ending was already built into the agreement. As leases expired, cottages emptied. The hotel declined, some structures were restored, while others were left to decay. Elkmont is creepy because beauty survived the abandonment. Fog still drifts through the trees. Cabins still sit along narrow roads. A porch can look peaceful from one angle and dead from another. It is not the terror of disaster. It is the sadness of a place locked after its final vacation. 14. Rush Run, West Virginia. Rush Run hides the way many Appalachian coal towns hide, not behind walls, but behind green growth. In West Virginia's New River Gorge, Rush Run developed as a small coal community connected to the larger industrial world of the gorge. Coal seams, rail lines, steep slopes, and narrow river corridors shaped the settlement. Families lived close to the mines because distance was difficult and work demanded proximity. Everything here was built around extraction: homes, paths, work buildings, and the rough daily schedule of miners moving between mountain and town. Rush Run was never famous like Thurmond, never as visually massive as Nuttallburg, and never as legendary as Centralia. That makes it feel more personal. It represents the dozens of smaller Appalachian communities that rose for one industry and disappeared when that industry no longer needed them. As mining declined, residents left, houses came down or collapsed. The forest moved in, covering foundations and softening the edges of what used to be streets, yards, and workspaces. The ruins along Rush Run feel like a half-erased sentence. You can still read parts of it: stonework, old roadbeds, building traces, but the full story is missing. That is the uneasy power of the place. It reminds you that not every abandoned town becomes famous. Some simply vanish into the gorge, leaving only enough behind to make the silence feel intentional. 13. Concrete City, Pennsylvania. Concrete City looks like someone built a perfect worker village, then realized perfection could still rot. Near Nanticoke, Pennsylvania, this strange company housing project was built in 1911 for employees of the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western Coal Company. Instead of wooden homes, the company used reinforced concrete, creating 20 duplex buildings with clean lines, solid walls, and a modern promise that must have looked impressive at the time. For coal workers used to rougher housing, Concrete City seemed almost futuristic. But the future had problems hiding inside it. The homes lacked some basic conveniences, repairs were expensive, and the concrete that looked permanent also made the place difficult to improve. By the 1920s, the company abandoned the village. People moved out, and the white concrete buildings stayed behind like empty shells. The creepiest detail is how hard the place was to destroy. Attempts to demolish the structures reportedly failed because the buildings were too solid. So instead of disappearing, Concrete City remained. rows of hollow, graffiti-covered houses standing in the woods like a failed experiment in industrial optimism. No wooden porch sagging into weeds, no cozy ruins softened by age, just concrete rooms, empty windows, and the cold feeling that these homes were built to last longer than the lives inside them. 12. Lost Cove, North Carolina. Lost Cove has the perfect name for a place the mountains quietly took back. Tucked into the rugged borderlands of North Carolina near the Tennessee line, Lost Cove was never easy to reach. That isolation shaped everything. The settlement grew around logging, farming, and railroad access, with families building lives in steep country where travel was difficult and weather could turn distance into a wall. This was Appalachia at its most remote. Ridges, woods, narrow paths, and a community held together by stubbornness. For a time, the railroad helped connect Lost Cove to the outside world. Timber could move, supplies could arrive, people had a reason to stay. But once logging declined and rail service faded, the settlement became harder to justify. Without reliable access and steady work, isolation stopped feeling romantic and started feeling impossible. By the mid-20th century, the last residents had left. Houses remained behind in the woods, some slowly collapsing, some standing just long enough to look like someone might return with a lantern and a key. Lost Cove does not need a dramatic disaster to feel unsettling. No single explosion erased it. No flood drowned it overnight. The town died from distance. It became too hard to reach, too hard to maintain, and too easy for the modern world to forget. 11. Proctor, North Carolina. Proctor is one of those Appalachian towns where the map changed and the people paid for it. Once located along Hazel Creek in western North Carolina, Proctor grew as a logging and railroad community before the creation of Great Smoky Mountains National Park and the rise of Fontana Lake changed the entire region. In its working years, Proctor had homes, stores, schools, rail connections, and families whose lives were tied to timber and mountain industry. It was remote, but it was not lifeless. The railroad made the valley feel connected. Then came a chain of changes too large for one town to survive. Logging declined. Land was absorbed into national park plans. Fontana Dam, built during the 1940s, created Fontana Lake and cut off access routes that had once connected communities like Proctor to the outside world. Promises of replacement roads became tangled in delays, politics, and terrain. The famous Road to Nowhere became part of the region's bitter memory. What remains of Proctor is not a neat ghost town street. It is a scattered mountain memory, cemeteries, old foundations, road traces, and stories carried by families whose roots were left behind water, trees, and locked geography. Proctor feels haunting because it was not simply abandoned by residents. It was cut off by decisions bigger than the people who lived there. 10. Rausch Gap, Pennsylvania. A cemetery in the woods is sometimes all it takes to prove a town was real. Rausch Gap sits deep in the Pennsylvania mountains near the Appalachian Trail, where forest now covers the remains of a coal and railroad settlement that once depended on movement, labor, and smoke. In the 1800s, this place grew because coal needed a way out of the mountains. The railroad brought workers, shipments, noise, and the fragile confidence that a remote hollow could become a working community. At one point, Rausch Gap had homes, a hotel, a school, mining activity, rail traffic, and enough daily life to make the valley feel permanent. But permanence in Appalachia often depended on one thing staying profitable. When the coal weakened and rail patterns changed, the town lost the reason people had come in the first place. The buildings did not survive the way they did in famous Western ghost towns. Appalachia does not always leave grand ruins. Sometimes it leaves stone foundations under leaves, cellar holes, pieces of wall, and graves with names that outlast the streets. Rausch Gap feels eerie because the forest has done almost too good of a job. The town is not standing proudly in decay. It is buried quietly under roots, moss, and trail silence, as if the mountain decided to erase the evidence without rushing. 9. Wehrum, Pennsylvania. Wehrum was not a tiny cabin settlement that quietly failed. It was a company-built coal town with streets, houses, stores, schools, and enough ambition to look permanent. Founded in the early 1900s in Indiana County, Pennsylvania, Wehrum grew around coal mining and the machinery of industrial Appalachia. Hundreds of houses were built for workers and their families. There were company buildings, a post office, hotels, a bank, churches, a school, and businesses serving a population that may have reached more than 1,000 people. It had the shape of a real town, but the heart of it belonged to coal. That was the danger. Wehrum existed because the mine existed. When the coal industry shifted and the local operation declined in the 1920s, the town's foundation cracked economically before the buildings ever fell. Families followed the paychecks elsewhere. Businesses closed because customers vanished. The railroad no longer carried the same promise. Now the strange part is how little remains from a place that once held so much life. The forest has swallowed most of it. A visitor might find foundations, scattered ruins, old road traces, and cemetery stones, but not the busy company town that once filled the valley. Wehrum is creepy because it proves a town of over 1,000 people can become almost invisible in less than a century. 8. Laquin, Pennsylvania. Laquin did not die because the ground stopped giving coal. It died because the forest was used up. In the mountains of Bradford County, Pennsylvania, Laquin rose in the early 1900s as a lumber town built around the Central Pennsylvania Lumber Company. This was not a gentle little logging camp with a few men and axes. It became a full industrial community with a massive sawmill, rail lines, worker housing, stores, a school, a hotel, and even chemical operations that turned wood byproducts into useful industrial materials. For a while, Laquin had the speed of a boomtown. Trees came down, trains hauled timber, workers poured in. Families built routines around a place that looked busy enough to last. But lumber towns carried their own ending from the beginning. The more successful they were, the faster the surrounding forest disappeared. When the timber was gone, Laquin had no second life ready. The mill closed, jobs evaporated, houses emptied, families moved toward the next paycheck. The town that had been carved out of the woods was slowly handed back to the woods. What remains now is scattered and haunting. Old foundations, stonework, rusted pieces, and traces of streets hidden under vegetation. Laquin's silence feels different from a coal town's silence. It is the silence after appetite, after a whole forest was cut down, processed, sold, and then left to grow over the place that consumed it. 7. Red ash, West Virginia. Red ash carries a darker weight because the ground here was not only worked, it was feared. Along the New River in West Virginia, red ash grew as a coal town in the late 1800s, part of the industrial network that turned the gorge into one of Appalachia's most intense mining corridors. Workers came for wages, families came because coal camps became entire communities. There were homes, mines, rail links, and coke ovens tied to a landscape where the river below and the mountain above seemed to press life into a narrow strip. But red ash is remembered for tragedy as much as labor. In 1900, a major mine disaster killed dozens of miners, marking the town with a history that never fully left. In company towns, disaster was not an abstract risk. It touched families, porches, dinner tables, and church gatherings. The same mine that paid wages could also take lives. Mining continued for years, but the town's future remained tied to an industry that eventually weakened. When the coal operations faded, red ash emptied like so many others in the gorge. Homes disappeared. Forest covered the domestic side of the story. Industrial remains stayed behind longer. The ruins now feel heavy. Coke ovens, foundations, cemetery traces, and the shadow of a town built beside danger. Red ash is creepy because the silence does not feel neutral. It feels like a place that remembers exactly what the mountain demanded. 6. Sewell, West Virginia. Sewell sits where the New River Gorge feels too steep for a town, and that is part of its strange power. In the late 1800s, this West Virginia community became a coal and coke settlement along the river, tied to rail transport and the booming extraction economy of the gorge. The terrain was harsh, but industry did not care about comfort. If coal could be mined, processed, and shipped, a town could be forced into almost any narrow space. Sewell had workers, houses, ovens, rail activity, and the hard rhythm of a place built around turning coal into coke for industrial use. Smoke, heat, river noise, and rail movement would have defined daily life. It was not a picturesque mountain village. It was a working industrial pocket pressed against cliffs and water. Over time, mining declined, and the town lost its purpose. Flooding, fires, and changing transportation patterns helped erase what people had built. Residents left because the economy left first. Like many gorge settlements, Sewell did not have enough space or flexibility to reinvent itself. The remains are scattered but powerful. Stone coke ovens still sit in the landscape, like dark openings in the hillside. The river keeps moving nearby, indifferent to the fact that an entire town once depended on the work done there. Sewell feels less abandoned than overpowered. Human industry arrived loudly, burned hot, and then the gorge absorbed it back into stone, leaves, and water. 5. Kaymoor, West Virginia. Kaymoor does not let you forget how hard people worked just to survive in Appalachia. Set into the steep walls of West Virginia's New River Gorge, Kaymoor was a coal town where geography itself became part of the story. The mine opened near the end of the 1800s, and for decades, coal moved out of the mountain through an industrial system of portals, tipples, tracks, ovens, and inkling. Workers and families lived in a place where the difference between home and work was measured in elevation, stairs, and danger. At its height, Kaymoor supported hundreds of people. There were homes, a school, company buildings, rail connections, and a mining operation that pulled millions of tons of coal from the mountain. But the town was never independent from the mine. The mine was the engine, the employer, the reason for the houses, and the reason people stayed. When the mine closed in 1962, Kaymoor's future collapsed quickly. Without coal, the steep settlement became impractical. Families moved out, buildings decayed, the forest began climbing over the industrial bones. Kaymoor is haunting because so much remains in such an unforgiving landscape. Coke ovens still line the hillside, mine openings, foundations, machinery, and long stairways suggest the scale of what once happened here. Every step feels like a reminder that the town was built against the mountain, and the mountain eventually won. 4. Nuttallburg, West Virginia. Nuttallburg looks like a machine the forest could not completely swallow. Founded in the 1870s by John Nuttall along the New River, this West Virginia coal town became one of the most visually powerful abandoned industrial sites in Appalachia. It was built around one mission: move coal from the mountain to the railroad. Houses, ovens, tracks, mine openings, and conveyors all served that purpose. Life here was not separate from the coal system. It was wrapped around it. In the 1920s, Nuttallburg became even more important when Henry Ford leased the mines to help supply coal for his industrial empire. That connection gives the town a strange national weight. This remote Appalachian gorge was not isolated from modern America, it helped feed it. But Ford's involvement did not make Nuttallburg permanent. Coal markets changed, operations declined, the town lost population. By the mid-20th century, the system that had once made the place valuable no longer needed it. Families left, buildings vanished, and the forest began working its way through the camp. What remains is severe and unforgettable. The conveyor structure still cuts across the slope. Coke ovens sit in rows. Foundations and industrial ruins suggest a town that functioned less like a neighborhood and more like a giant extraction engine. Nuttallburg is creepy because it does not feel dead in a gentle way. It feels shut off. 3. Thurmond, West Virginia. Thurmond is disturbing because it was built for motion and now almost everything about it is still. Deep in the New River Gorge, Thurmond became one of West Virginia's most important railroad towns during the coal boom. The Chesapeake and Ohio Railway turned this narrow mountain settlement into a powerful shipping point. Coal from surrounding mines moved through here. Trains stopped constantly. Travelers, miners, businessmen, and freight passed through a place that felt much larger than its population. In the early 1900s, Thurmond had hotels, banks, stores, railroad offices, boarding houses, and enough money moving through town to make it one of the region's most active rail communities. For a small place squeezed between mountain and river, it carried enormous economic weight. Some days, the depot saw more life than towns 10 times its size. Then the patterns changed. Coal declined, passenger rail weakened, highways shifted movement away from places like Thurmond. Businesses closed one by one, fires damaged parts of town. The energy drained slowly, not dramatically, which somehow makes it sadder. The commercial row still stands facing the tracks, like it expects customers to step off the next train. The depot remains. The rail line still passes through, but the town itself feels almost emptied out of time. Thurmond is one of Appalachia's great haunted scenes, a town where the architecture still faces movement, but the life that justified it is gone. 2. Glen, West Virginia. Glen is almost impossible to understand now because the thing that made it famous has mostly vanished. Across the New River from Thurmond, Glen once had one of the most talked about hotels in the region. The Glen Hotel was large, busy, and legendary, a place tied to railroad travel, coal money, businessmen, gamblers, and the restless energy of the New River Gorge during its industrial peak. At one point, this area was not quiet backcountry. It was a corridor of money, trains, smoke, and risk. The town around it depended on the same forces that lifted so many gorge communities: coal, railroads, river geography, and the constant movement of people through a narrow mountain world. Hotels and businesses appeared because the economy seemed strong enough to support them. The most famous story connected to Glen is a marathon poker game said to have lasted years, a legend that captures the reckless atmosphere of boom-era rail towns. But places built around movement can disappear when movement changes. Fires, floods, shifting rail patterns, and economic decline stripped Glen down until the Grand Hotel and much of the town were gone. Unlike Thurmond, it did not remain as a preserved street scene. It became more like a ghost behind another ghost. Glen is creepy because absence is the main ruin. The story is bigger than what you can see. A famous hotel, a noisy town, an entire world of travelers and coal money, now reduced to fragments, memory, and the river still passing by. 1. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia is the Appalachian nightmare because the town is gone, but the disaster underneath it never stopped breathing. This was once a normal Pennsylvania coal borough, with churches, schools, row houses, small businesses, cemeteries, and families living above the same anthracite seams that had supported the region for generations. Then, in 1962, an underground coal seam caught fire, and Centralia slowly became a town people could no longer trust beneath their own feet. The terrifying part was how ordinary everything still looked at first. Streets remained, homes remained. People still tried to live there while smoke escaped from the ground, pavement cracked, and dangerous gases turned familiar neighborhoods into warnings. By the 1980s, federal buyouts pushed most residents out. Houses were demolished, blocks disappeared, and Centralia was reduced to empty roads, cemeteries, warning signs, and silence. What makes Centralia so disturbing is not a row of abandoned buildings. It is the absence. The town was physically erased, but the fire kept moving underground. In Appalachia, many towns died when coal disappeared. Centralia died because coal refused to disappear.